My son left home on a gray morning that felt unremarkable in every way that matters. The kind of morning you do not think to remember until it becomes the last one you ever have. The sky sat low and heavy, pressing down on the earth like it had something to say but no strength to say it. I stood on our porch holding a chipped coffee mug, watching him move with the quiet confidence of a young man who believed his future was already written. His name was Darius Coleman. He was 24 years old, tall, broad in the shoulders, and steady in the way men are when they believe the world still makes sense. He carried his lunch pail in one hand and a dented thermos in the other, the same ones he had carried for years. Nothing about that morning suggested finality. There were no dramatic words, no long pauses, no sense of danger hanging in the air. Inside the house, the smell of breakfast still lingered. Eggs, toast, and coffee mixed with the faint scent of motor oil that never quite left Darius's clothes. The radio hummed softly from the corner of the kitchen, playing an old soul song that had been on rotation for as long as I could remember. His mother, Loretta, stood near the stove in her robe, watching him lace his boots. She told him not to rush. She always did. He smiled and told her he wouldn't. He poured his coffee too full, burned his tongue, and laughed it off. That laugh still echoes in my head when the nights grow long. Darius leaned down and kissed Loretta on the cheek, promised he would be home before dinner, and reached for his jacket. When he turned to me, I clapped him on the shoulder and told him to drive safe. He nodded like he always did, as if safety was something he could guarantee by sheer will alone. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The sound was ordinary. Too ordinary. The kind of sound you hear every day without realizing how much weight it carries until it stops happening. We followed him onto the porch as his pickup truck rumbled to life. It was an old blue Ford, nothing special, but he took care of it like it was brand new. The gravel crunched under the tires as he eased down the driveway, past the bare trees still waiting for spring. Loretta waved until the truck disappeared over the hill. She turned to me and said, "He's growing up so fast." I smiled and said, "He's still our boy." I didn't know then how wrong that sentence would feel years later. It was April 3, 1989, a Tuesday in Dayton, Ohio. The kind of day where life moves forward whether you're ready or not. Darius had been working at a manufacturing plant just outside the city for nearly 3 years. He was saving money, talking about moving out, maybe buying a place closer to work. He liked routine. Same route. Same hours. Same habits. That's why, as the morning turned into afternoon, something inside me began to feel unsettled. The sky darkened around noon, releasing a thin, cold drizzle that soaked into the ground and refused to leave. I spent the afternoon in the garage fixing an old mower that didn't need fixing, just to keep my hands busy. Every so often I checked my watch, telling myself I was imagining things. By 5 o'clock, I walked to the window. By 6, I stepped outside. By 7, Loretta stopped pretending not to worry. She called the plant around 8. I could hear her voice from the living room, tight but controlled. When she hung up, she told me the night supervisor said Darius had clocked out on time. No delays. No incidents. A coworker said he mentioned going straight home. That should have eased my mind. It didn't. Midnight came quietly. No headlights. No engine. No familiar footsteps on the porch. Loretta made coffee even though neither of us drank it. Every sound outside made her flinch. The house felt colder than it should have been, heavier somehow, as if it already knew something we were trying not to accept. At 2 in the morning, I put on my coat and told her I was going to drive his route. She didn't argue. She just nodded and stared at the door like she expected it to open any second. I followed the same roads Darius took every day. Past the closed gas station. Past the empty diner with the flickering sign. Down the long stretch of highway that cut through farmland and silence. I pulled over at every turnout, swept the ditches with my headlights, and listened. Nothing. When I came home just before dawn, Loretta was still sitting by the window, the porch light glowing behind her. She looked at me once and knew. I didn't have to say a word. That look divided our lives cleanly in two. Before that morning, our house had been full of plans, noise, and ordinary worries. After that, time stopped moving forward. That was the first night of waiting. And we did not yet understand that waiting would become our way of living. The sun rose the morning after Darius did not come home, but it felt like it had no right to. Light spilled through the windows as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not shifted in its sleep. Loretta had not moved from her chair by the window. The porch light was still on, casting a pale glow against the early morning fog. She asked me if I thought he might have stayed at a friend's place. I told her it was possible, though the words felt thin even as I spoke them. Darius never stayed anywhere without calling. He had been raised to believe that silence worried people, and he never wanted to be the cause of that kind of worry. I told her I was going back out. I didn't say what I was looking for. I didn't know myself. The drive from our house to the plant took just under 30 minutes, mostly straight down the highway, past fields still brown from winter and businesses that had not yet opened for the day. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, like a familiar room after something terrible has happened inside it. I stopped first at the gas station near the turnoff. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I asked if he'd seen Darius or his truck. He shook his head without hesitation. I bought a cup of coffee out of habit and left it untouched on the counter when I walked out. My hands were shaking too badly to carry it. At the plant, the parking lot was already full. Men in work boots and gray coveralls moved in small groups, their voices low. When they saw me, conversations stopped. Faces shifted. I recognized boys who had grown up with Darius, now men with tired eyes and strong hands. I asked the same questions again. Did he say anything different? Did he seem distracted? Did anyone notice someone he was arguing with? The answers never changed. He clocked out. He walked toward his truck. He said he was heading home. That was it. I walked the lot slowly, scanning every row as if his truck might suddenly appear if I looked hard enough. It didn't. The absence felt deliberate, as if someone had carefully removed every trace of him. I drove back roads for hours that day. I stopped at diners, repair shops, and roadside stands. I asked strangers if they had seen a young black man driving a blue pickup late the night before. Some looked at me with sympathy. Some looked away. No one had answers. By noon, I called the police again. This time, I insisted. I explained that Darius had never missed a night at home without calling. I told them about the route he took, the time he left work, the truck that hadn't been found. The officer on the phone sighed, the sound heavy with practiced patience, and said they would send someone by. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They walked through the house, asked questions, wrote notes. They stood in Darius's room, looking at his neatly folded clothes, his work boots by the bed. One of them asked if Darius had been depressed. The question hit me like a slap. I said no. I said my son had plans. I said he was saving money. I said he was building a future. The officer nodded, but his eyes said he had already placed Darius into a category that required no urgency. That night, I drove the highway again. The darkness felt thicker this time, pressing against the windshield. I pulled over every few miles, turning off the engine and listening. Wind moved through the fields. A distant truck passed. Once, I thought I heard an engine idling in the distance and my heart leapt, but it was nothing. At midnight, I walked into the station and filled out the missing person report. I wrote down everything I could remember: his height, his weight, a small scar near his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike as a child. I described the way he walked, the way his voice sounded when he laughed. The officer wrote it all down slowly, methodically, as if he were documenting a broken appliance instead of a missing human being. When I got home, Loretta was still awake. The porch light burned bright. She asked me what they said. I told her they were looking into it. That was not the truth, but it was all I had to offer. The next few weeks moved in strange, exhausting cycles. Days filled with motion. Nights filled with silence. Officers came and went. Questions were asked again and again. Maps were spread across tables. Nothing appeared. We printed flyers with Darius's picture. A good picture, one where he looked like himself. We taped them to telephone poles, diner windows, bulletin boards, anywhere someone might look long enough to recognize him. People promised to keep an eye out. Some meant it. Some just wanted the conversation to end. Local news came for a few days. They filmed us standing on the porch. Loretta held one of Darius's shirts in her hands like it was something sacred. The reporter called it a mystery disappearance. Then another story replaced it. The police searched the river. They searched abandoned lots. They checked hospitals, jails, shelters. Every tip led nowhere. Some nights the phone rang with someone claiming they had seen him in another town, another state. I chased every call, driving for hours only to find strangers who looked close enough to make my heart break all over again. The seasons changed, but time did not move forward inside our house. Darius's room stayed exactly as he left it. His jacket hung on the door. His boots remained by the bed. Loretta refused to wash his pillowcase. She said she could still smell him there. Every knock on the door made my chest tighten. Every phone ring felt like it might carry the answer. It never did. By Christmas, the flyers were faded and curling at the corners. Loretta decorated the tree anyway. She hung his childhood ornaments and whispered his name as she placed each one. I stood behind her and pretended to believe as fiercely as she did. Hope did not disappear. It just learned how to hurt more quietly. After the search faded from the headlines, it did not fade from our lives. It simply learned how to live quietly in the corners of every day. The police stopped calling as often. Their voices, when they did call, sounded rehearsed, careful, like people speaking from a script written for grief they no longer expected to solve. One spring afternoon, a sheriff arrived with a small cardboard box recovered from an abandoned storage unit near the state line. Inside were a few tools, a jacket, and a photograph of Darius standing beside people we did not recognize. There was no explanation for how it ended up there. No answers followed. Just the box, placed carefully in my hands like a substitute for closure. After that, the case was labeled inactive. For the authorities, that word meant resources were needed elsewhere. For us, it meant the world had quietly decided to move on without our son. Loretta took it harder than I did. Or maybe she simply showed it more. She blamed herself for not stopping him that morning, for not asking more questions, for not sensing that something was wrong. I told her none of that mattered, that there was no way she could have known. But guilt does not listen to reason. It finds its own voice and speaks whenever it wants. Our house changed. Not suddenly, but steadily, like something slowly losing its warmth. Loretta stopped cooking meals the way she used to. She would stand at the stove holding a spoon, then simply stop, staring out the window as if the answer might appear in the yard. The first year, she set a place for Darius at the table every night. 3 plates. 3 glasses. She talked to the empty chair, telling him about her day, reminding him to eat while his food was still warm. I never corrected her. Love does not follow rules when it is desperate. Neighbors came often at first. They brought casseroles, kind words, promises not to forget us. Over time, their visits grew shorter. Grief that does not resolve makes people uneasy. Eventually, they waved from their cars and drove on. Loretta began sleeping in Darius's room. She said she felt closer to him there. One night, I found her sitting on the floor holding one of his boots, rocking gently. When I tried to lift her up, she asked me not to move anything. If he comes back, she said, he needs to recognize his home. That sentence broke something inside me that never fully healed. I stopped talking much after that. Words felt useless. Every conversation ended the same way, with Loretta asking if I thought Darius was still alive. Always said yes. Sometimes I believed it. Sometimes I said it because saying anything else felt like a betrayal. Years passed in this way. Quiet, heavy, repetitive. The house aged faster than we did. Paint peeled. Wood creaked. The garden grew wild. Time stretched instead of moving forward. The anniversaries came whether we wanted them or not. The first year. The 5th. The 10th. At first, we marked them with candles and photographs. Later we stopped. There are only so many times you can reopen the same wound before it refuses to close again. Loretta's health began to fail. The doctor called it stress. I called it heartbreak. She smiled less. Spoke less. Eventually, she stopped opening the curtains. The sunlight made her cry. By the time 10 years had passed, we were 2 ghosts living in a house full of memories. There were no arguments, no shouting, no anger. Just silence so thick that even the ticking of the clock sounded cruel. When Loretta died, the house became unbearable. I stayed for a while, sitting in the same chair, staring at the same walls, listening to echoes that were no longer there. Then one morning, I packed a small bag and walked out without locking the door. There was nothing left to protect. I drifted across the country the way men do when they no longer belong anywhere. I worked odd jobs in small towns, fixing fences, painting barns, cutting wood. I slept in motels that smelled of dust and gasoline. I learned how to keep moving so I would not have to think. Everywhere I went, I listened. Every rumor felt like a thread I had to pull. A man in Louisiana who looked like him. A drifter in Colorado who had lost his memory. A truck driver in Nevada who claimed he picked up a quiet hitchhiker near the state line. I chased them all. Each time, I arrived too late or found nothing at all. Hope became a habit I could not quit. It kept me alive and punished me for it at the same time. I kept a small notebook in my jacket pocket. Inside were names, towns, dates. It became a record of disappointment. Still, I carried it everywhere. At night, I sat alone in diners and imagined Darius across the booth, drinking coffee the way he used to. I talked to him in my head, asking where he had gone, why he hadn't written. The silence never answered, but it made the nights bearable. Years turned into decades. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting miracles. I learned how to carry grief quietly, folded neatly inside me where no one else could see it. In Colorado, I worked on a ranch for several years. The owner never asked about my past. We watched the sun rise over the mountains each morning, and for a while, I felt something close to peace. I stopped chasing rumors. I stopped scanning every face. Or so I told myself. The truth was, I never stopped looking. I just learned how to hide it better. By the time I settled in a small trailer outside Tucson, Arizona, I was tired, not of living, but of searching. My hands shook more than they used to. My knees ached. But my heart still carried the same question it always had. Were you, son? I thought my story was ending there, quietly, without answers. I was wrong. In the morning everything changed. It began like all the others. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of morning built from habit rather than intention. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and turned on the television only to keep the silence company. The sound stayed low, barely more than a murmur, blending with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the trailer settling in the desert air. I was not watching. I rarely did. The television was just something to fill the space where voices used to be. My coffee had gone cold when the headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. I do not remember the exact words at first. Only the way my eyes lifted without permission. Only the way my chest tightened before my mind caught up. A man was being escorted out of a courthouse in Nevada, surrounded by flashing cameras and raised microphones. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His hair was gray. His face thinner, harder. But his eyes stopped me. For a moment, my body forgot how to breathe. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but I knew that face. I had studied it in photographs for 35 years. I had memorized it in my dreams. I knew the shape of that jaw, the tension around the mouth, the way his eyes narrowed when he was trying not to show emotion. It was Darius. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor, but the sound felt far away. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The reporter's voice floated through the room, calm and practiced, but the words landed like blows. Lived under a false identity for more than 3 decades. Multiple aliases. Born in Ohio. Missing since 1989. I leaned forward in my chair, gripping the edge like it was the only thing holding me upright. Beneath the image, smaller text confirmed what I already knew in my bones. The boy I had buried 1,000 times in my heart was not dead. He had been living. The camera angle shifted. For a brief second, he looked up, his eyes flicking toward the reporters. In that instant, it felt like he was looking straight at me. Like he knew. Like he had always known I would still be watching. The reporter continued, listing facts that sounded unreal. He had lived under another name. Worked under government contracts. Traveled often. Married twice. Divorced once. No known children. No family. That was the part that hollowed me out. I turned off the television, but the silence afterward was worse. It pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I stepped outside and sat on the trailer steps, staring at the open desert sky, waiting for anger, relief, or joy to arrive. None of them did. All I felt was confusion. For 35 years, I had imagined every possible reason for his disappearance. Kidnapping, violence, amnesia. I had prayed for answers I thought I could survive. I had not prayed for this one. As the day stretched on, the truth settled heavier. He had not been lost. He had not been taken. He had chosen to leave. He had built a life where I did not exist. That night, I turned the television back on. They replayed the clip. This time, I noticed the distance in his expression. The walls behind his eyes. The boy I raised had been replaced by a man who knew how to disappear. Over the next few days, more details emerged. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. Disciplined. Quiet. He told people his family had died years ago. That sentence split something open inside me. Loretta had gone to her grave still believing he would come home. She made his birthday cake every year. Placed a single candle on top. Whispered his name before sleep. All that time, he was alive, telling the world we were gone. I called the police station in Nevada. Saying his real name out loud after all those years felt strange, like speaking to a ghost. The officer asked about my relationship. Put me on hold. When he returned, his voice had changed. He doesn't wish to speak with anyone from his past. I tried again. I explained who I was. That I was his father. That his mother had died waiting. That I only wanted 5 minutes. No accusations. No questions. The officer paused. Then he said, he stated his family passed away years ago. The line went dead. That was the moment I finally understood what disappearance truly means. It is not being absent. It is being erased. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at nothing. Later that night, I pulled a box from under my bed. Inside were Darius's childhood drawings, school papers, and a card written in uneven letters that read, "To the best dad in the world." I traced the words until they blurred. Over the following weeks, I wrote him letters. Dozens of them. I told him I was not angry. That I forgave him even if I did not understand. That I would always call him my son. None were returned. None were answered. The news moved on. He vanished again. This time by choice. I used to think the cruelest thing a man could endure was loss. Now I know it is learning that the one you lost chose to disappear. Some nights, I imagine what I would say if I saw him again. I would not ask why. I would not demand answers. I would tell him that his mother never stopped loving him. That she kept his picture beside her bed until the end. And I would open the door. Because love does not end when someone leaves. It just learns how to survive silence.